Back in 2020, when the world was shutting down due to COVID, most people were confined to their homes. As an avid backpacker and camper, I used this time as an opportunity to travel to different national parks and camp in solitude. One of my destinations was a secluded creek in Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. A year prior, in 2019, an incident at my job had seriously damaged my reputation. A mistake I made caused financial losses for a significant number of people, and as a result, I became the target of their anger. The situation escalated to the point where I had to change apartments, get a new phone number, and eventually quit my job. For a while, I was constantly harassed by unknown numbers. Some of the messages were even threatening. I wasn't sure if it was a group of people or a single person using multiple numbers. Eventually, the harassment stopped, and I was relieved, thinking people had moved on. Without work at the time, I decided to travel and immerse myself in nature. I drove 3 hours to Rocky Mountain National Park, parked my truck, and hiked up the trail to the creek. The place was completely deserted, likely due to the lockdown and the fact that it was still winter. A thin layer of snow covered the ground, crunching under every step I took. Reaching the creek, I was relieved to see it wasn't frozen. It was flowing peacefully, providing the tranquility I desperately needed. I set up my tent a little way off the main path, gathered some wood, and started a fire. Cooking sausages over the flames, I let myself relax, eventually settling down with a book. As night fell, I rolled a joint and started smoking, enjoying the solitude. Then my phone buzzed. Seeing an unknown number sent a jolt of anxiety through me. When I checked the messages, my heart pounded. The first text read, "How's your camping going, buddy?" The second, "It's beautiful out here." The third, "I see why you came up here." A chill ran down my spine. If they had only asked about my camping trip, I might have assumed it was a family member, but the way they spoke, it was as if they were here, watching me. Trying to steady myself, I texted back, "Who is this?" No response. Paranoia crept in. I stood up, scanning the darkening forest around me. Every shadow seemed more menacing, every whisper of wind more sinister. My heartbeat thudded in my ears as I retrieved my handgun from my bag, feeling marginally safer. Normally, I would have put out the fire before sleeping, but the thought of being in total darkness terrified me. I crawled into my tent, gripping my gun tightly. Minutes passed, stretching into eternity. My phone remained silent. I tried reading again but couldn't focus. Eventually, I turned to YouTube, letting true crime videos distract me. Then, just as I had begun to calm down, my phone buzzed again. A new message. "Doesn't matter anymore." Panic surged through me. I texted back, "How did you know I'm camping?" But got no reply. My mind raced. Was this a prank? A friend messing with me? Or was it someone from my past, someone still holding a grudge? But how would they know I was here? The fire outside had nearly died, the embers barely glowing. In the silence of winter, the woods were eerily quiet. Then, breaking that silence, I heard it. Footsteps in the snow. Slow, deliberate, approaching. They stopped about 6 feet from my tent. My grip on the gun tightened. Suddenly, a flash of light. Someone either shining a flashlight or taking a picture. Then, just as suddenly, the footsteps retreated, fading into the distance. My phone vibrated again. A new message. An image. The photo was of my tent. My breath hitched as another text followed. "Have a good night's sleep." A surge of adrenaline overpowered the lingering haze from the weed. Without thinking, I unzipped my tent and fired 2 warning shots into the air. Almost immediately, I heard hurried footsteps crunching through the snow, retreating into the woods. Whoever it was had been watching, waiting. Fueled by fear and anger, I shouted a threat into the night before ducking back into my tent. There were no more messages, no more footsteps. Still, I stayed awake for hours, every noise keeping me on edge. When I finally fell asleep, it was fitful, my body tense, even in unconsciousness. Morning light was the biggest relief. Whoever had followed me out there wasn't prepared for me to be armed. I don't look like the type to carry a gun, and it was actually the first and only time I had fired it since buying it. But it worked. Almost 5 years have passed since that night, and I haven't been bothered again. Still, I can't help but wonder how differently things could have turned out if I hadn't been prepared. During my childhood, my family had a yearly tradition of traveling to northern Michigan for a weekend in October. My Uncle Jim owned a 4-acre property there, with a spacious house that could accommodate all of us. It had 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. My brother and sister shared one room, while our 4 cousins had another. The remaining rooms were for our parents. Uncle Jim was an avid hunter and fisherman, often camping for hunting trips around the country. Though my dad loved animals and never hunted, he occasionally joined Jim on these trips. Part of my uncle's land was dense forest, with red paint marks on trees indicating the property line. Beyond that, it was just county-owned woods, with the nearest house likely miles away. One afternoon, my brother Adam, our cousins Jake and Joe, and I came up with an idea while our dads talked about hunting. We wanted to camp out in the woods that night. Our dads, already a bit tipsy, enthusiastically agreed. Our moms, however, were less convinced but didn't outright say no. So my dad and Uncle Jim took us into the woods with a tent. The girls, our sisters and cousins, weren't part of the plan. As we walked, Joe, the youngest, complained about the distance, prompting our dads to laugh. That was just how they were, especially when drinking. At the time, I was 13, Adam and Jake were around 10, and Joe was about 9. We set up camp in a small clearing covered in soft, mossy ground that my uncle called deer beds. He assured us it was an ideal campsite, one he had used before. Our dads, still tipsy, gave us a half-hearted lesson in setting up the tent, making sure we did most of the work. It was a large tent, big enough for 4 kids. Once set up, we put our sleeping bags inside and headed back to the house to play outside until dinner. At dinner, our moms reiterated their concerns about us being too young to camp alone in the woods. Our dads, brushing it off, joked that we were close enough for them to hear our screams if anything went wrong. Later, as night fell, they led us back to the campsite, ensuring we had flashlights and extra blankets for warmth. I also brought a deck of Uno cards for entertainment. Once we settled in, our dads left us alone in the dark woods. Despite their earlier reassurance, we were farther than we initially thought, deep enough that the house's lights were completely out of view. We played Uno for at least half an hour, the tent illuminated by our flashlights. Everything was going well until we heard a distant scream. It sounded like a girl. We froze, exchanging uneasy glances. I quickly recalled that foxes could make noises resembling human screams and reassured everyone. Joe looked particularly scared, but my explanation seemed to calm him. We resumed our game, and I kept winning round after round. No one mentioned the scream again, as if we had collectively pushed it from our minds. Then, it happened again. This time, the scream was much louder and closer. Silence fell over us again, but now, even I was on edge. Joe looked like he might cry. I told everyone to turn off their flashlights. We crawled into our sleeping bags and sat in total darkness. None of us dared to run back to the house. Fear of drawing attention, of being chased, kept us rooted in place. Somehow, hiding in a thin fabric tent felt like the safer option. We whispered amongst ourselves, speculating whether it could still be a fox. I admitted I didn't know. We hoped so. Then we heard footsteps. Rapid footsteps crunching through the leaves, coming straight for the tent. They stopped just outside. A blood-curdling scream erupted. This time, unmistakably human. Before we could react, the tent shook violently. We all screamed in terror. Jake and Joe shrieked in fear while Adam and I yelled for whoever it was to get out. In a panic, I unzipped the tent and one by one we bolted into the woods, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The run back to the house was pure adrenaline, the most terrifying experience of my life. Every second felt like we were being chased. We burst onto the property, still screaming. Our entire family was already outside, drawn by the commotion. Relief washed over us as we reached safety. But then, I noticed something unsettling. Our cousins, Jamie and Christina, along with my sister, weren't outside. Accusingly, I turned to my dad and Uncle Jim, convinced they had put one of the girls up to scaring us. But when they let us inside to check, we found the girls fast asleep in their beds. That's when it became terrifyingly clear. Whoever had been outside our tent was a stranger. Our dads grabbed rifles and searched the woods but found nothing. The next morning, we packed up our tent and gear. That was the first and last time we camped out in those woods. We didn't even play outside after dark anymore. What kid would, after such an experience? My guess is as good as anybody's, as to who was outside of our tent and why they were doing what they did. What I'm about to tell you still makes me question what is real and what's not. This happened to my dad and me, and even now, 2 years later, I get chills just thinking about it. I know how it sounds. If I were you, I wouldn't believe it either. But I swear to you, every word is true. 2 years ago, my dad and I went camping in a remote spot deep in the country. We did this often, a way to escape from real life for a little while. This place was special. Hiking trails, zip lines, a bit touristy but with deep history, Native American lands. The first night was perfect. Families at other campsites, campfires glowing, kids laughing, the kind of peaceful night you go camping for. We cooked hot dogs, roasted marshmallows, cracked open a few beers and made small talk with the people around us. A typical first night, but the second night, that's when things changed. The staff told us we were the only ones left in the park. No other campsites were booked. At first, we were psyched, an entire campground to ourselves. It sounded peaceful. We spent the day hiking, fishing, taking it slow. At one point, we listened to a scary podcast by the river, just for fun, to lean into the spooky atmosphere. We thought we were being funny. By the time the sun started setting, we were feeling good, a little buzzed from the beers, tired in that satisfying way after a long day outdoors. We decided to head to the park's information center to charge our phones and grab some snacks before it got too dark. The walk back to our campsite is when the unease set in. The woods felt different. The air was heavier. The sky had this strange tint, like twilight didn't want to leave. My dad turned to me and said, "Doesn't this feel off? Like we're in some kind of dream?" He was right. It did. The forest felt endless, stretching out in every direction. My chest got tight. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. We didn't say much after that, just kept walking, both of us glancing over our shoulders like we expected to see something lurking in the trees. Back at camp, we stayed close to the fire. We didn't talk about the weird feeling. We didn't need to. It was like we both silently agreed to act normal, pretend nothing was wrong. We roasted marshmallows, played music, even smoked a little weed to distract ourselves. Not the typical father-son moment, but hey, it helped. Then around 9 p.m. it happened. A noise, a bang, as if a tree had fallen. It came out of nowhere, loud and close, echoing through the woods from the direction of the river maybe 100 yards away. We grabbed our flashlights and pointed them toward the sound. Nothing. No movement. No glowing eyes. Nothing. Bigfoot, we joked, nervous laughter slipping out. But neither of us believed it. Minutes passed. Then it came again. Louder this time. Farther off, but the same sound. The same weight. We shined our lights again. The forest swallowed the beams, letting us see only the trees surrounding our tent. Then the third bang, closer. The fear hit. Whatever it was moving toward us, circling the campsite. Before we could collect our thoughts, the fourth bang, 20 yards away, maybe less. Adrenaline kicked in. Whatever high I had from the weed was gone. My dad turned to me, eyes wide. I saw the fear in his face. "Get in the tent." We scrambled, throwing the last of the firewood into the flames, hoping the light would scare off whatever was out there. Then we dove inside, leaving everything else behind. I flattened myself against the tent floor, my heart pounding. My dad followed, moving slower. As he was about to zip the tent shut, the loudest bang yet. So close the ground shook. My dad froze, staring into the darkness. I whispered his name. He didn't move, just stood there, eyes locked on something outside. It's standing there. A chill ran through me. What's standing there? I don't know, he muttered, voice trembling. It's like a wall of darkness. He sat by the zipper, gripping the only weapon we had, a small knife. Useless, really, but it was all we had. Then came the noise, a vibration, deep and unnatural. It wasn't just sound, it filled the air, a feeling inside us, tightening our chests. You hear that? My dad whispered. I couldn't answer, just nodded, too scared to make a sound. Then, another sound, not an animal, not human, a guttural, alien-like noise. The only way I can describe it. It sounded like the Demogorgon from Stranger Things. Nothing I've ever heard before. We sat frozen, too scared to breathe, too scared to move. I had a small mesh window by where I lay. I refused to look. If I saw something looking back at me, I knew I'd lose it. Then, nothing. We blacked out. I don't remember falling asleep. Neither does my dad. But somehow we woke up, still in the tent. My dad, still clutching the knife. I shot up, heart racing, checked my phone. Dead. Dad, check your phone. Dead too. We had both charged them fully the night before, making sure we had them in case of an emergency. We stepped outside to pee, standing back to back, still terrified. The air was cold. The food we'd left on the table was untouched. The fire we had stoked before diving into the tent had burned to ash like it was never touched. The whole place felt wrong, like we weren't supposed to be there. We spent the rest of the night in silence, didn't even try to sleep. At first light, we packed up. Didn't talk until we were in the car, speeding away from that place. Only then did we finally discuss it. And we realized we both felt the same thing. Watched, hunted, like something was waiting for us to slip up. We told my mom when we got home. She thought we were crazy, said maybe we got drugged or inhaled some weird gas. But it wasn't that. It was real. To this day, we don't know what it was. We never saw it. Not fully. But my dad came closest. And whatever he saw, it wasn't human. And it wasn't natural. We've never heard a story like ours. We haven't been back to that campsite since. Haven't gone camping at all. And I don't think we ever will.